The dust had not settled yet when Elias Moore heard the horse stop. He looked up from the fence post just as a man he recognized. Rafe Kellen yanked a woman from the saddle and let her fall hard onto the dry ground in front of the ranch. She did not cry out. She did not beg. She pushed herself up on one elbow. Blood and dirt streaked across her arm, her eyes sharp with a fury that refused to break. Rafe didn't bother to explain. "Keep the animal," he said, as if speaking of a sick mule. "Don't touch her. I'll be back." Then he turned his horse and rode away. Elias stood there, the post hammer heavy in his hand, watching the woman struggle for breath. He hadn't chosen this moment. He hadn't invited it. But he knew something else just as clearly. If he turned his back now, she would not live through the night. Before we continue, please take a moment to support the channel. A simple like, a quick comment, or hitting that subscribe button helps these Wild West tales reach more people who love them. Let me know where you're listening from, and thank you for riding along with us. Elias Moore's ranch sat just far enough from Dry Creek that the town's noise never quite reached it. On clear mornings, he could see the dust rising from the road that led into town, hear the faint clatter of wagons and voices carried by the wind. But by the time the sun dipped low, the world around his land belonged to cattle, creaking fences, and the long, patient silence of the San Pedro Valley. He had chosen the place for that reason. Elias was not a man who hid from people, but neither did he invite them in. He owned a small stretch of land, a modest herd, and little else. The ranch fed him, occupied his hands, and asked no questions in return. In Dry Creek, people knew him as a quiet man who paid on time, argued with no one, and never lingered longer than necessary. Some thought him cold. Others thought him proud. Elias never corrected them. Words, he had learned, were easy to misunderstand. He worked steadily, without hurry, without complaint. His face carried a permanent seriousness that made strangers uneasy. Though those who dealt with him long enough learned he was fair, even careful, in all things. He did not drink much. He did not boast. He did not explain himself. Whatever he felt stayed behind his eyes. The woman lying in the dirt at his feet did not belong in that quiet order. She was Apache, he knew that at once. Not from her clothes alone, torn and dust-stained, but from the way she held herself even while injured. Her body shook with exhaustion, yet her spine remained straight. Her jaw was set, not in fear, but in refusal. She looked at him as if measuring the distance between them, not seeking mercy, only preparing for what might come next. Elias crouched a few steps away, far enough not to crowd her. He took in the shallow rise of her chest, the dark smear of blood along her forearm, the way one hand trembled despite her effort to steady it. Whoever had dragged her here had not done so gently. Whoever she was, she had fought. He set his hammer down slowly. "You don't belong here," he said at last. His voice was low, even, unused to speaking more than necessary. Her eyes flicked to him, sharp and assessing. She did not answer. That, strangely, eased something in him. He had not expected words. People said too much when they were afraid. Silence often meant something else: strength, or pride, or pain held tightly in check. The sun slid lower, stretching shadows across the yard. Elias knew how quickly the desert cooled once the light faded. How unforgiving the night could be to a body already worn thin. He also knew what trouble came with letting a wounded Apache woman remain on his land. For a long moment, He weighed the risks he understood against the one he did not. Then he stood and nodded once, more to himself than to her. "You can stay," he said, "until you're strong enough to leave." He did not say why. He did not need to. Elias did not touch her until he had to. He fetched water first, moving with the same deliberate calm he used when handling a skittish horse. He set the tin cup on the ground within her reach and stepped back. She watched every movement, eyes following his hands, his boots, the way he kept his body angled so he was never directly over her. When she reached for the cup, her fingers shook. The smallest thing, hardly noticeable, tightened in his chest. "Drink slow," he said. Not a command, just information. She ignored the advice and drank anyway, then stopped, breath hitching as the pain caught up to her. She did not look at him for help. She did not ask. She simply waited for the moment to pass. Elias turned toward the house. "You can walk." Her answer came after a beat. "I can stand." That would have to be enough. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of wood, leather, and old smoke. The place was plain: one table, one chair, a narrow bed against the wall. Nothing that suggested company. Nothing that suggested welcome. He cleared the table with a sweep of his arm and laid out what he had: clean cloth, a small bottle of alcohol, a knife he had already wiped down. She tensed when she saw the blade. "It's for the cloth," he said, and set it down. She studied his face, searching for something he did not offer. Whatever she found there made her look away. The wound along her forearm was worse than it first appeared: deep scrapes, bruising, dried blood crusted into the skin. Elias worked carefully, his hand steady, his touch brief and purposeful. He did not apologize when she flinched. He did not soothe her with empty words. He cleaned, wrapped, and tied the cloth firm enough to hold, loose enough not to hurt. "You fight hard," he said once, before he could stop himself. Her mouth curved into something sharp, harder than he expected. Elias nodded. He did not ask who he was. When he finished, he stepped back, giving her space again. "Sleep if you can. I'll be outside." "You're not afraid I'll run?" she asked. "If you could," he said. "You already would have." She did not reply, but when he turned to leave, she spoke again, low, controlled. "You're not like him." He paused with his hand on the doorframe. "That's a low bar. That's not what I meant." He waited, but she said nothing more. Outside, the sky had darkened to a deep, cooling blue. Elias fed the animals, checked the fence, kept his hands busy while his thoughts circled back to the cabin. He did not tell himself stories about who she was or where she would go. He had learned better than that. People arrived in trouble. People left when they could. The ranch was not meant to hold anything in place. Still, when the night settled and the stars came out sharp and cold, he found himself listening. Her breathing was rough at first, then steadier. At one point, she murmured something in her own language, a sound like a warning or a promise. Elias did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was not fear. It was resolve. He sat on the step, hat pulled low, eyes on the dark stretch of land beyond the fence. This was how trouble began, not with gunfire or shouting, but with a single choice made quietly, without witnesses. He had not chosen her, but he had chosen not to walk away. And for a man like Elias Moore, that was never a small thing. Morning came without ceremony. The sun rose pale and steady over the San Pedro Valley, lifting the night's cold from the ground inch by inch. Elias was already awake, moving through the routines that had shaped his days for years, checking the troughs, counting the cattle, tightening a loose rail where the fence sagged. He worked the way he always did, methodical, unhurried, as if time were something to be measured in tasks completed rather than hours passed. When he glanced toward the cabin, he half expected the woman to be gone. She was not. She stood in the doorway, leaning lightly against the frame, her injured arm bound and held close to her side. Her face was drawn with pain, but her posture was upright. She watched him without speaking, her gaze steady and unblinking. "You should sit," he said, not looking at her directly. "Morning comes hard after a night like that." "I've had harder," she replied. Her voice was low, controlled, carrying no request for sympathy. Elias nodded once and returned to his work. He did not argue. He had learned that advice, when given to people who did not ask for it, often sounded like judgment. They settled into an uneasy rhythm. Elias left food where she could reach it: cornbread, dried meat, water drawn fresh from the well. He did not hover. He did not ask questions. When he spoke, it was only to explain what needed explaining: which gate stuck, where the shade held longest in the afternoon, how far it was to the road that led back toward town. She listened. Sometimes she answered. More often, she did not. By the second day, she could walk the length of the yard without stopping. By the third, she was sitting outside while Elias worked, her eyes following the slow movement of his hands. She studied him the way one might study a tool, testing its weight, its balance, its reliability. "You live close to the town," she said one afternoon. "Close enough," he answered, "but you don't belong to it." He considered that. "I do my buying there. That's usually enough." She huffed softly, not quite a laugh. "A man who wants the benefits of people without the burden of them." The words were sharp, but not careless. Elias did not bristle. "People can carry more burden than they know," he said. "Sometimes they put it on others without asking." Her eyes narrowed. "You speak as if you've seen it." "I have." That was all he offered. In the days that followed, the distance between them shifted in small, nearly invisible ways. Elias noticed things he told himself did not matter: how she favored her uninjured arm, how she watched the horizon at dusk, how she flinched not at sudden sounds, but at laughter drifting faintly from the direction of town. He noticed how she never turned her back on him fully, not even when she slept. She noticed things too. She noticed that Elias never entered the cabin without making noise first, even when he thought she was asleep. That he kept his rifle within reach, but never laid it where it could be seen as a warning. That when a rider passed on the distant road, he stood where she could see him standing there, not blocking her path, not positioning himself between her and the open land. "You don't trust easily," she said one evening as the sun sank low. "Trust's expensive," he replied. "I don't buy it often." She studied him for a long moment. "And yet, you let a stranger stay." He met her gaze then, just briefly. "I let someone heal." That answer unsettled her more than any excuse might have. On the fourth day, she spoke her name, Atsa. He nodded, accepting it without comment. Names mattered. He knew that. They were anchors, sometimes burdens. He did not give her his in return, not yet. That night, as the wind moved through the grass and the cattle settled into sleep, Elias found himself thinking about the choice he was making without meaning to. Every hour she remained on his land made it harder to pretend this was temporary, harder to convince himself that his responsibility ended with her wounds closing. He remembered another time years ago when he had told himself that silence was safer than truth. When he had thought that managing information was the same as protecting people, the memory came unbidden, heavy and unwelcome. He pushed it away and focused on the present, the fire crackling, the steady breathing from inside the cabin, the simple fact that, tonight, no one was in immediate danger. By the end of the week, Atsa was strong enough to help. She did not ask. She simply began mending a tear in a feed sack, sweeping the cabin floor, carrying water in smaller buckets. Elias watched from a distance, uneasy with the sight. Help, when it came uninvited, had a way of binding people together. He was not sure he wanted that kind of bond. "You don't have to," he said once. "I know," she replied. "That's why I do." The answer lingered with him long after she walked away, one afternoon. As they sat in the shade, she spoke again, her tone different this time, less guarded, more measured. "You don't look at me the way others do." He frowned slightly. "How's that?" "As if I owe you something." The truth of it surprised him. Elias looked down at his hands, rough and scarred, resting uselessly in his lap. "I don't want anything from you." She studied his face, searching for the lie. Whatever she found there made her nod slowly. "Then you're rarer than you think," she said. That night, Elias lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. He realized, with a quiet unease, that his fear was no longer of the trouble she might bring to his door. It was of what it meant that he cared whether she stayed or left. For a man who had built his life around standing apart, that realization was the most dangerous thing of all. Rafe Kellen came back just before sunset. Elias saw him first from the far end of the pasture, a dark shape cutting across the pale land, riding without hurry. That alone told Elias something was wrong. Rafe was not a man who took his time unless he believed the ground beneath him was solid. Elias set the fence tool down and waited. Atsa was near the cabin, folding cloth she had washed earlier. When she noticed the change in Elias's posture, she followed his gaze. Her body stiffened instantly, not with fear, but with recognition. Her hand moved, almost without thought, toward the knife she now carried tucked at her belt. "He's back," she said. "I know." Rafe dismounted a few yards from the house, his smile easy, his eyes sharp. He looked from Elias to Atsa and back again, taking in the distance between them, the way neither stood behind the other. "Well," Rafe said, brushing dust from his sleeve, "she's still breathing. I'll give you that." Elias did not answer. Rafe's gaze lingered on Atsa, then slid back to Elias. "I figured you'd do what you do best. Keep things quiet. Keep your head down." "She's not yours," Elias said. Rafe laughed softly. "That's where you're wrong. Everything's someone's. Out here. Just depends who's willing to say it out loud." He stepped closer. Atsa shifted, placing herself slightly behind Elias, not hiding, but choosing her angle. Elias felt the movement more than he saw it. It set something firm inside him. "You don't want this trouble," Rafe continued. "I do business. You keep cattle. We don't need to mix the two." "You dragged her here," Elias said. "You made it my business." Rafe's smile thinned. "I gave you a favor. Somewhere safe to leave her while things cooled down." "She's not cooling down," Elias replied. "And neither are you." For a moment, Rafe's eyes hardened. "Careful. You're not built for this kind of loyalty." Elias finally turned fully toward him. "This isn't loyalty." "Oh," Rafe tilted his head. "Then what is it?" Elias did not answer right away. He thought of the quiet days, the careful distance, the way he had told himself again and again that she would leave as soon as she could. He thought of the one thing he had learned too late, years ago. "It's a line," he said at last. "And you crossed it." Rafe's hand dropped to his gun. Before he could speak again, Elias stepped forward and placed himself squarely between Rafe and Atsa. The movement was unremarkable, almost casual, but it changed everything. Atsa inhaled sharply. She had not asked him to do this. She had not expected it. Yet there he was, blocking her from view, from threat, from bargaining. Rafe stared at him, disbelief flickering across his face. "You serious?" "Yes. You'd risk your land, your name over her." Elias did not look back at Atsa. "Over myself." That was when Rafe understood. And when he did, his expression shifted not to anger, but to calculation. "All right," he said slowly, raising his hands. "No need to turn this into something ugly." He took a step back, then another. "I'll leave," he continued, "for now. But you're keeping something that doesn't belong to you, sooner or later. That always costs." Elias did not move. He did not threaten. He simply stood. Rafe mounted his horse, eyes never leaving the ranch. "Enjoy the quiet while it lasts." He rode off, disappearing into the lengthening shadows. For a long moment, neither Elias nor Atsa spoke. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "I know. Then why did you—" Elias exhaled slowly. "Because once, a long time ago, I stayed quiet when I shouldn't have." She studied him, really studied him this time. "And what did it cost you?" He met her eyes, everything that mattered. The sun dipped below the hills, leaving the valley wrapped in dusk. The cattle shifted uneasily. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cried out. "He'll come back," Atsa said. "I know. And you still chose this." "Yes." She nodded, the gesture slow and deliberate. "Then whatever happens next," she said, "you won't face it alone." That night, Elias did not sleep. He sat on the step, rifle across his knees, watching the dark. He did not tell himself that Rafe was gone. Men like Rafe did not leave cleanly. They waited, they watched. They convinced themselves that patience was the same as control. Elias felt no fear, only a strange, steady calm. He had made his choice. Whatever came with it would have to come honestly. Rafe Kellen did not ride far. He circled wide, keeping to the low ground where the mesquite grew thick and the land dipped just enough to hide a man and his horse from the ranch yard. He told himself he was patient, that waiting was part of the work. Trouble, after all, always ripened in its own time. He tethered the horse and settled in beneath a stand of scrub, the rifle laid across his knees. From where he crouched, he could see the faint outline of Elias Moore's cabin against the dark. A single lantern burned low inside, then went out. Rafe smiled to himself. Men like Elias always thought they could draw a line and have the world respect it. Rafe had learned long ago that lines were only suggestions. What mattered was who stepped over them first. He meant to wait until the ranch slept, meant to move quietly, meant to finish things clean. Instead, the night stretched on, the desert cooled faster than he expected. The ground leached warmth from his bones. At some point, the steady silence pressed in around him, heavy and dull. He shifted his weight, told himself he would rest his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Sleep took him anyway. At the ranch, Elias remained awake. He had moved the cattle closer to the corral, checked the fence twice, and left the rifle where he could reach it without looking. Inside the cabin, Atsa sat near the wall, her knife within reach, but her hands resting loosely in her lap. They did not speak much. Words, tonight, would only circle the truth they already shared. "You should sleep," she said once. "So should you." She nodded. Neither moved. Time passed in pieces, broken by the soft lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through grass, the slow arc of stars overhead. Elias thought of the man he had been when silence felt safer than choice. He wondered if that man would recognize him now. Just before dawn, the light began to change. It was subtle at first, a thinning of darkness, a softening at the edge of the sky. Elias noticed it the way he noticed weather, by instinct more than sight. He stood and stepped outside, breathing in the cool air. That was when he heard voices, not close, not threatening, measured. Atsa was beside him in an instant. Eyes narrowed, listening. The voices came again low, deliberate, carried on the wind. "They're mine," she said quietly. "My people." Relief passed through Elias, not sharp, not triumphant, just steady. He nodded and stayed where he was, hands visible, posture open. From the low ridge to the east, 3 figures emerged, moving with the confidence of men who knew the land intimately. They carried themselves with purpose, not haste. One of them raised a hand in greeting when he saw Atsa. She stepped forward. "Chaitin," she said, and the tension in her voice finally eased. Her brother approached, his gaze flicking briefly to Elias before returning to her. He looked her over carefully, taking in the bandaged arm, the steady stance. "You're alive," he said. "I am." Behind them, the 4th figure approached more slowly, older, broader, with a presence that did not need to announce itself. Hokona, the leader, Atsa's father. He inclined his head toward Elias. "You gave her shelter." Elias answered simply. "She needed it." Hokona studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. It was not gratitude. It was acknowledgement. The sound came then, a sudden scrambling, a sharp intake of breath from the scrub beyond the ridge. Rafe Kellen woke to light, not full day, but enough to see the world had shifted against him. His heart lurched as he registered movement on the land above figures where there should have been none. He rose too quickly, boots sliding on loose stone. The rifle slipped from his grasp and clattered against the rock, the sound loud in the morning stillness. Panic seized him, then not fear of men, but of being seen, of losing control. He ran. The ground fell away faster than he expected. The slope was steeper here, cut by years of water and wind. He reached for a mesquite branch that snapped under his weight. His foot found nothing but air. The sound that followed was brief, a scatter of stone. A dull thud. Then silence. No one chased him. Chaitin looked toward the ridge, then away. "It's done." Atsa closed her eyes once, then opened them again. There was no satisfaction in her expression, only release. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The sun broke free of the horizon then, spilling light across the valley. It touched the ranch, the cattle, the figures standing together in the cool morning air. Hokona spoke again. "This land remembers choices." Elias met his gaze. "So do I." The older man nodded, as if that answer had been expected all along. Behind them, the day began quiet, unremarkable, and entirely changed. The morning did not hurry them. After the first light settled over the San Pedro Valley, the world seemed to pause, as if it were waiting to see what would be done with the quiet that followed. The cattle stirred, birds moved through the low brush. Nothing demanded an answer right away. Atsa stood with Chaitin and Hokona near the edge of the yard. There were no raised voices, No urgent gestures. Whatever needed to be said between them was spoken softly, in a language Elias did not understand. He did not try to. He stood back, hands loose at his sides, giving space where it was due. When they finished, Chayton turned to him. "She can come home," he said simply. "Our people are safe for now. My place is with them." Elias nodded. He had expected no less. The truth of it did not sting the way he thought it might. Hokona stepped forward. He was older than Elias had first realized. His strength carried not in muscle, but in the certainty of his presence. His eyes rested on Elias, steady and searching. "You did not take what was not yours," Hokona said. "You did not turn away when it would have been easier." Elias shifted his weight, uncomfortable with praise. "I didn't do more than I should." Hokona's mouth curved, just barely. That is what most men tell themselves when they are afraid of what they chose. Atsa looked at Elias, then not sharply, not defensively, but with a calm that felt earned. "He didn't ask anything of me," she said. "Not even trust." Hokona regarded his daughter for a long moment, then inclined his head once more. "That matters." They spoke a little longer, plans forming without urgency. There would be time. There would always be time, now that the danger had passed. When Chayton mounted his horse, he paused beside Elias. "You live close to the town," he said. "Close enough to be seen." Elias met his gaze. "I don't hide." Chayton nodded. "Good. With that." They rode away, three figures moving back toward the rising land, not looking back. The dust they left behind settled quickly, leaving the ranch as it had been before, and yet not at all the same. Elias stood alone in the yard for a long moment after they were gone. Then he turned toward the cabin and began to prepare. He filled a saddlebag with food, folded a blanket, set aside a canteen. He worked with the same careful attention he gave everything, but there was no hurry in his movements.